The Ferguson Report was an investigation of the city's judicial system. One chapter stated that the illegal and unconstitutional conduct of the municipal court and policing practices were inextricably tied. I'm Bonita Cornute, your host. This is part 2 of the series on the aftermath of Michael Brown Jr.'s death. Back in a minute.
If you don't know Jesus, this invitation is to you. If you haven't met Jesus today, you haven't seen him, this invitation is for you. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, but you don't have a church home, this invitation is for you. If you're worshiping with us online and you feel lonely, you feel that no one cares, this invitation is for you. Come to Jesus. This is God's church. Come. Join in with us. Help us to lift up the bloodstained banner. Help us to celebrate the risen Lord. Come and become a part of us.
Through Ferguson is an organization that is working to dismantle systemic racism. Here with me is Executive Director Anissa McCaskill. Welcome, Anissa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
What is Forward Through Ferguson?
Forward Through Ferguson is an anti-racist organization that was birthed out of the Ferguson Commission report. We are the trustees and the holders of the 189 calls to action that came out of the Ferguson Commission's report, calling for a change and a shift in the way St. Louis and the region and even the nation moves.
189?
189 calls to action. So we have 4 components. We have youth at the center. We have justice for all. We have opportunity to thrive. And then we also have racial equity.
And how many of those 189 action items have been addressed? Can we say that it's been cleared?
There's no way for us to say that 189 calls to action, which are the result of generations of systemic racism and power structure, can be addressed within a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. It's ongoing. There are some things that point to the fact that we can address them, but there are other things that, just as it took generations to build, it will take generations to deconstruct and put something more positive in their place.
What's the most difficult of those issues, that action items that you're still addressing?
Racial equity, I would say, and all that includes in the calls to action, is fed by the other 3. So we know that the opportunity to thrive, the youth at the center, and the justice for all, those things all are fed and grew because we are dealing with an area that is racially inequitable. Rather from Laclede's Landing was the place where we had Africans and African Americans sold. We have the old courthouse where we know that they were also sold, the Dred Scott case. We have a history in this region of inequity, and it is permeated through the way that we lend, the way that we house, the way that we teach our children, the way that we even seek justice is all permeated with racism. And so all of the things that we're doing lead into racial equity. It leads into how we hire. It leads into how we speak to our neighbors. It even leads into how we spend our money on a day in and day out basis. You know, economic development, real estate, all of those things are covered by the plan and also covered by the 189 calls to action. So it's hard for me to say which ones are the most difficult, because in the end, they're all based in racial inequity and the necessity in order to change, shift, and in some instances, deconstruct and rebuild.
The region is no different, though, than other parts of the country, is it? I mean, can you say that St. Louis is more?
It is not. I think the reason why Ferguson took everybody by surprise is that you think of the Midwest as flyover country, right? You think of it as being very boring and there's not a lot that's occurring here. But we use the term, and we heard the term when the uprising happened, that Ferguson is everywhere. If it could happen here in boring old St. Louis, Missouri, it could happen anywhere. And I think the surprise was that it did happen in some place that most people don't think about. So if it could happen here, it most definitely could happen anywhere. And the same issues and the same occurrences and the same inequity that caused that uprising to occur are prevalent throughout our nation.
Talk about the youth component of the call to action. Describe what that is attempting to address.
I think what we saw during the uprising were a lot of young people who felt that the adults failed them, and they were living in tents. They were out in the rain, the sleet, the snow, everything, because they were dealing on a day in and out basis of the choices that the adults were making, basically.
And that's living in tents during the protests.
During the protests. But we also now have a very large group of young people who are unhoused just because housing is so expensive. We have a situation where we're at the crux of being able to make a difference in how our young people are able to move forward. I'll give an example. I'm 52. I have a soon-to-be 20-year-old son. The cost of education for me compared to him has exponentially increased. My parents were able to pay for me to go to college. I can't afford, even with a good salary and excellent benefits, to afford to put my son through college unless he has good financial aid and things of that sort. We're at a situation now where young people want to be heard, they want to be seen, and they also want to be able to have the opportunities that my generation and your generation were able to have. We're looking at the fact that they may not be able to own a home. We're looking at the fact that even renting has gotten to the point where you're living in predatory living situations. So youth at the center and the opportunity to thrive are very closely tied together. Even having a trust fund for your children to be able to go to college, that's one of the calls that came out of the calls to action. So we talk about the city of St. Louis and the trust fund for children's educations that the treasurer's office started under then Treasurer Tashara Jones, now Mayor Jones. That actually is a response to one of the calls to action because there are so many parents who don't have the means or even the structure or the know-how to save for their children to go to school.
I understand. Well, at this point, that's one element, and then the other two that you haven't described.
Justice for all and opportunity to thrive.
Opportunity to thrive. What is that? How does that
Opportunity
manifest?
to thrive kind of speaks to the same thing that I was talking about with our young people. You have people who want to go into businesses, people who want to be able to own a home, but they can't get the lending because the structures that we have within our banking systems aren't set up for people who necessarily don't have the history with banking or maybe don't have the trust in banking that others who grew up with a generational opportunity to be in those financial structures have had. I bought my house at the age of 50. That was my birthday present to myself. But the discussion of home ownership was something that I always grew up with. That's not necessarily so for everyone who is coming against these structures. In addition to opportunity to thrive, just the ability to walk down the street and to feel comfortable in your neighborhood without the fear of gentrification and that someone will come in and decide that your neighborhood is the it neighborhood and then you will no longer be able to live there, even if you do own your home.
And that happens in St. Louis.
And that happens a lot in St. Louis. We see that, when I moved here, there were some areas that I was told that were south of Forest Park, you don't go there. But then now those same areas are the it neighborhoods. I moved here in 1996 and it's like a chess game, how it moves around, that some areas are the it areas and some areas are not. So then that becomes an area of disinvestment until someone decides that, oh, that's a great deal on that property. Let me move there. And then the people who live there are faced with rising taxes. They can no longer afford those taxes even if they own their home. And then they are pushed out, redevelopment comes in, and they don't have the opportunity to stay someplace that their family has been for generations.
I'm thinking about the Grove. When I came here, that was a totally different neighborhood.
The Grove is specifically the neighborhood I'm talking about. I had a classmate who lived in the Grove, and everyone who was an upperclassman at WashU told us, you don't go to the Grove. They can come visit you. Don't go to the Grove. Don't go to Vandevetter.
What is it now?
What is it now? Everybody is going there. Right off of Vandevetter, we have one of the biggest entertainment centers in the St. Louis region.
And the people who once lived there can't afford to live in that area.
Right.
And then the last area, justice.
Justice for all. So, we had close the workhouse. That was something that was resonating with what the calls to action talked about. You have North County and the North County Collaborative. That occurred because we had a situation in North County where literally if you drove 5 feet, you could get stopped by another municipality, and heaven forbid that you have a warrant. I literally was in a situation when I worked for another organization. Our receptionist was on her way to work after dropping her child off, and she had some tickets that she had not paid. She got stopped, and they found out that she had a warrant because she had not paid those tickets. So they pulled her in, and we put the money together to get her bailed out. When we were ready to bail her out, they moved her to another municipality because she had tickets in that municipality and they had a warrant on her. So there was a stacking of warrants. And what we see is organizations like Arch City Defenders and others who came up after the Ferguson uprising to help with bail, the cash bail situation, the stacking of warrants, but also addressing the fact that we have a lot of municipal structures that were using their police departments to generate revenue. Mm-hmm. And how do you get justice when justice is seeking to make money off of your back?
Well, now somebody would say, why does she have tickets in multiple municipalities? Is she not paying attention to her own responsibility as the driver?
I think that we're also going back to opportunity to thrive. If you're making a base salary and you have tickets, and the tickets, you get stopped because a tail light is out, and then they go through every possible thing that is possibly wrong with you. And this municipality has a reputation for not being the most hospitable place to even come and address what's going on with you. They're not working with you to set up a payment plan. They're not working with you to even look at your schedule as to when you can come in. And everybody's having court on the same night. So you choose to go to one court, but the other court puts a warrant out on you because you can't come, and they won't reschedule and they won't give you a continuance. That's how those things happen. It's not a matter of just people not wanting to address the issues. It's also a matter of the system not looking at the fact that they're stacking the deck against people being able to work with them and address the issue.
Okay. What are some of your successes?
Some of our successes, it's difficult to say. I would say the fact that we have so many partner organizations that actually are using it. 189 calls to action. With a staff as small as mine, we have 10 people. There's absolutely no way that we would address that. We saw during the uprising that community stepped forward and community wanted to be heard, but also community took charge of those calls to action. We are the stewards of it. And so we work in collaboration with organizations such as the Deaconess Foundation for the creation of the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, which allowed us to infuse the community with revenue, whether it's for a business, whether it's for a nonprofit, some of which didn't have 501c3s. So we were able to work with Deaconess and with these organizations to help them find fiscal sponsorship in order for them to go ahead and do the work that needed to be done in community. We actively have what we call the Racial Equity Capacity Building Roundtable, where organizations that are interested in shifting the culture of their organizations are able to come and sit around a table and do the work of shifting and changing mind thought within the organization, as well as how they move forward.
Who are some of those? What are some of those organizations? I mean, are you talking about corporate?
We actually have a variety of different organizations, and quite honestly, off of the top of my head, I'm going blank. Okay. But it's a mixture, quite honestly. What we found is the large corporations aren't necessarily the ones who come to that for us. It's the smaller mom and pop organizations or the smaller nonprofits who tend to want to make that shift. We do have relationship with some corporate entities, but not nearly as many as we have with the smaller entities who are more citizen and relationship based as opposed to the bottom line.
I see. But civic leaders, political leaders, are they engaged in this?
Not in our roundtable, no. They're aware of it, and we do have relationship with some elected officials. We are fortunate that when we are working specifically in collaboration with some of our partners in what we call the struggle in the work, we have people that we know that we can call and sit around the table with them directly and ask questions about shot spotters, which is a technological advancement utilized by the city of St. Louis and throughout St. Louis County, where if someone fires a gun, it can narrow down to the neighborhood where the gun was shot. But then that also means that you're surveilling a neighborhood in anticipation of someone firing a gun.
Surveilling, or I mean, is someone monitoring that?
It's a piece of equipment that they sit out on a street in a neighborhood,
Yes.
and they leave it there, and someone is monitoring it. And then when the shot happens, they go into the neighborhood and start asking questions. But it sits there waiting for something to happen.
In the meantime, me and my family in that neighborhood walking down the street
Are looking at this piece of equipment knowing that someone is waiting for something to happen in your neighborhood.
interesting. Other issues that you have discovered through Ferguson.
We have discovered that, I'll just say, there are people that want to put us into a box of what we should and shouldn't be. Specifically because we were birthed out of the Ferguson Commission. And so there are many people who think that we strictly will speak on racial equity, or we will strictly speak on opportunity to thrive, or we strictly will speak on justice for all, or we strictly will speak on youth at the center within the boundaries of what they think that we should be speaking on. So for instance, we did a statement on ceasefire in Palestine. And there were those who said that we should not be speaking on that. But what we know is that when the Ferguson uprising happened, there were Palestinians who were telling the kids how to react to tear gas, how to take care of themselves in those situations. When police advanced on them, how to move out of those spaces. And we saw the correlation between what happens in Gaza and what historically has happened in the Middle East and what actively was happening during the uprising. And so when we drew that correlation and gave a reading list of things for people to educate and start the discussion, whether you agree with us or not, there were those who felt that we overstepped our bounds. We are known for being data people. So we do reports such as our Transforming 911, which talks about the failure of the 911 system in the St. Louis region. I know for a fact that there are classrooms on the college level in the St. Louis area that are using that plan to talk about the infrastructure of first responding in St. Louis, but it also points to a national problem.
But no, that's good.
That's good. But there are people who feel that in that discussion and the fact that we call for some changes to the system, systemic change, you hear that term again, that perhaps we shouldn't be having that conversation because it touches on criticism of how government is doing its job. But it's not necessarily criticism when you have the data to show this is what you need to improve what you're doing. It's speaking the truth to power.
I understand. And some folks are not comfortable with that.
Some folks are not, but some people are thrilled to have the information.
From your perspective, would you say that that there's a positive outlook for this region?
I can't say that there's a positive outlook. What I will say is that St. Louis, with all of its gifted people and all of the people who care, has everything that it needs to improve.
Okay, why aren't we?
I think, one, there is a fear from some people from stepping out and being the first to say that these are the changes I accept and that I'm moving toward. I think that there is generally, and I mentioned it before, a generational structure that is intimidating for some to think that they can take it down, and they may not feel that they are up to the challenge and may not even realize that there are a coalition and other like-minded people that they can come together with to do that work of shifting and changing, deconstructing, transforming, doing what is necessary to move us forward. But I think the biggest thing is to be able to step forward and say, this is wrong. It needs to change. And there are so many people who are intimidated by making that statement, whether them personally saying it or hearing someone else say it. It creates fear. It really does create fear. But I do believe that St. Louis, I'm from Kentucky, 1,500 people in my hometown, one stoplight.
Oh.
I've lived in St. Louis since 1996. St. Louis has been good to me and to my family. Mm-hmm. I would not have stayed here if I didn't think that it was someplace that I could do well and that my child could do well, despite the problems. So I can't say that it's a positive outlook per se, But I can say that St. Louis has what it needs, and it has the people that it needs in order to make the change. But they first have to recognize that change has to happen.
I'm thinking about, when you talk about family and the whole incident of Mike Brown, we know that there are an awful lot of guns on the street in this area. What do we do about that? I mean, where is Forward Through Ferguson with respect to gun violence?
We are in a space where we know that guns are a problem, but we also know for a fact that there are spaces where when you try to address gun violence, they don't even want to hear you say the word gun. I've literally been in meetings with law enforcement where they don't want to use the term gun violence. So we work in coalition with people like Dr. Punch, who has a organization that actually calls itself the Bullet, I don't want to misquote what the name of it, but Bullet Injury Clinic. He calls it the Bullet Related Injury Clinic,
yes,
the BRIC. He's working out of Del Mar Divide. And he specifically is using the term bullet because the word gun is off-putting to those who are against that. We stand for the abolition of open and free carry. We also recognize that gun violence is an issue in our community, but those guns didn't just show up in the community on their own. Gun culture is pervasive in the United States, period. We see it in our schools, we see it in our homes, and we also see a desensitizing toward violence and death and gun culture. And again, it's pervasive. I remember when I moved here in '96, I almost never saw a gun in St. Louis. But I've been in my car with my son and seen people carrying AK-47s. So we instead of being stricter, despite all the things that have happened, we're strict about the things that we possibly shouldn't be strict about, like what books our children are reading. And we're lessening the strictness on things that we should be concerned about, such as weapons that are killing our families. In addition to the fact, so many guns that we have on the streets are stolen.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about mainly. Those on the street that really get into the wrong hands. Not those people who are licensed and or law-abiding gun owners who do what is necessary to lock it up and protect their families.
I think when we talk about guns and gun culture, we have to look at the underlying current of why someone needs to carry a gun in the first place or feels they need to carry a gun. That speaks to the fact that people don't feel safe. And while we can say, yes, the gun is stolen and it shouldn't be stolen, it gets to the fact that people do not feel safe. You have a lot of young people who do not feel safe. And this is their way of protecting themselves, their possessions, their families. So yes, someone who has a licensed gun buys a gun for the same reason. A young person on the street may not have the means to go into a gun store or for whatever barriers be able to purchase a gun, but they are typically carrying not necessarily to rob someone, but for their own protection. We do see crime, but we also see crime from people who have licensed guns as well.
What about education? And we'll kind of wrap it up. Our school systems. Can you see Forward Through Ferguson working to address improvements in our schools?
Yes, we actually have a study that talks about improvements in the schools, but one of the things that we see is the school to prison pipeline. The fact that African American students are suspended at a higher rate than their white peers. And we know that once you get the record of being a troubled student, that follows you because that record follows you all the way through, and eventually you become that troubled student and that troubled person. The early engagement in schools with resource officers of children of color occurring is a problem. As a parent, my son was suspended the first time when he was in kindergarten.
Kindergarten suspension?
He was protecting himself against a fourth grader, but there was a zero tolerance policy, even though it was explained that he was protecting himself. So we have a system of things set up, but just the funding and the micromanagement of curriculum as opposed to the encouragement of innovation and resource in schools is problematic in Missouri, but you also see it nationwide. So many discussions about what children are reading as opposed to making sure that they're reading and giving them what they need. During the pandemic, I was not with Forward Through Ferguson, but my church was involved in a lot of activity to make sure that school children got what they needed. And just the discussion and the fight to make sure that children in the St. Louis area had Chromebooks because they're sitting at home. How do they do it? And some of the things that were said in that space as far as, oh, their parents are just going to pawn it, or the parents aren't going to go through the work with them, as opposed to the active looking at why we weren't ready for the pandemic and now how far behind our children are coming out of the pandemic. There's a learning lag that has occurred, or actually that has lengthened since the pandemic because they were already behind.
I understand.
And now it's broadened.
What's the next step or the next big project, I guess, for Forward Through Ferguson?
Well, we're 10 years out. So the biggest thing is to support the family of Michael Brown Jr. in their work to make sure that his name is remembered, that the call that was made out of those 189 calls to actions are not forgotten, but then also to do a reflection of how much progress has actually been made and how much is still going to be made. For us, we did our T911 report, which is our most recent report, and it's available on our website, Transforming 911. It's our most recent report. We are looking to get another set of data because we've got the data from St. Louis County. Now we're going to be looking at St. Louis City. We're doing some work in coalition regarding a prosecutor's roundtable, where we're looking at the data from St. Louis City and St. Louis County to figure out what the record is in terms of getting people to speedy trial, ensuring that their rights of citizens who are arrested in the prosecutorial process are being respected, but then also what the pattern is of the types of crimes that are coming up for prosecution versus not going up against. So we're busy, but the biggest thing for this year is to reflect and remember Michael Brown's anniversary and to be of support of the family and community, because I know how I feel being at the 10-year mark. I've touched on it with other people that I know, and so there's just a lot of reflection that needs to occur, and we plan on being not at the center because the family's at the center, but adjacent to the center in whichever way we can support.
Well, I think on that note, we'll conclude our conversation, and
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
been a pleasure to talk with you and to understand a little more about what you're doing and what came out of that incident in 2014. And Forward Through Ferguson obviously still has work to do, still busy.
Yes, ma'am.
And we appreciate you taking a minute to come talk with us.
Thank you.
Anissa McCaskill.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Forward Through Ferguson, working to make change in our community. I'm Bonita Cornute. Join us again next time.